This is Masters of the Market. I'm Johnson Andrews.
And I'm Eric Clary. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Masters of the Market. We've got a really exciting guest here today, Stephen Osborne, who owns his own law practice, and we've been working together for about 5-6 years now.
Yeah, that's right.
So thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about who you are.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me
Absolutely.
here. It's great. My first podcast.
First podcast. Let's go.
Yeah, so it's exciting for me.
Good.
So I'm like you from New Brunswick originally.
Yep.
Yeah. So I grew up in St. John, did my undergrad in Fredericton. While I was there, I spent a term in England, and then from there, I did my undergrad by way of background in sports management.
Yep.
I was a big baseball fan, so I decided, as part of my last term in school, we had to do a work placement, and the opportunities in Fredericton were somewhat limited, like
Yep.
Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, that kind of thing. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it just wasn't what I was looking for.
Sure.
So I decided on my own to fly down to Boston, and Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball has annual winter meetings. So I went down there, passed out 100 resumes, and got hired on by a team in New Jersey.
Cool.
Yeah, so I ended up working there for 6 months.
Yep.
And did a little bit of everything. Ticket sales, merchandise. I was the mascot a few times.
What was the mascot?
So the team name's the Trenton Thunder. So
Okay.
they had a big Thunderbird.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
yeah, that was an experience.
right on.
I had one of the in-between innings events was a race around the bases. So so during that, they always have like some theme to it. So this particular theme that day was they had a sumo wrestler in town. So I squared off with a sumo wrestler, and by accident he fell on me. And I had an earpiece in, and all I could hear is Steve dead.
Yeah. Is he still breathing? Is he alive?
Yeah. So that was a really fun experience, but the off season was completely the opposite. It was like, here's a phone book, sell tickets.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that was the best use of my time and my education. So
Yeah.
went back home. I worked for ExxonMobil for a year, and then applied to law school, and I went to law school at Dow in Halifax. So while I was there, I worked part-time for the RCMP, and from there I moved out to Saskatoon. My wife is a physician. She was doing a residency out there.
Yep.
So I followed her out there. I got hired on by a national firm, and then moved here with my wife in 2010. And stayed on. My firm at the time, I give them a lot of credit. Like, they opened a satellite office for me, which
Yep.
is a big leap for a first-year lawyer.
Sure.
Stayed on with them for another 6 years, and eventually we parted ways. It got to a point where I was bringing in all the clients, but they were still taking a big
Majority
cut.
of the profits.
Yeah. So it's just a numbers issue at the end. We parted ways on great terms. So I opened my own practice up in 2016.
Yeah.
And
Kind of around the time I met you.
Yeah. So
Yeah, it
shortly
wasn't long
thereafter,
after, yeah.
I think. Yeah. So and those initial stages were a bit rough, like any entrepreneur. So I was first few months, living off my line of credit, and learning all these things that a new entrepreneur has to learn, like bookkeeping and website development, banking, and all these things they don't teach you in school.
Well, yeah, you got to, you obviously are concentrated in law, and we'll get into what type of law you practice for the most part. But when you create a business, all of a sudden you have to wear different hats. And part of this show is to help educate people that, you can have a passion, you can have a skill set. Going into business and hiring people and providing a service or a product to people requires definitely a lot of different hats in the beginning. And it's important to really, not be over analytical and, over risk tolerant, let's say, but to really start to understand the different skills required. And that'll at least help you understand when you need to, sort of diversify in a sense that it's maybe time to hire someone who specializes in marketing. Maybe it's time to hire someone who specializes in accounting, because obviously you as a lawyer, I deal with your office deals with my office. You and I aren't dealing with 100% of the things that we do. We have staff and professionals that we've hired that manage a lot of different things for us. You and I have the big conversations. And so talk a little bit about obviously the law that you practice, but more so specifically what were some of the struggles? I know there's a lot of people that love to be a lawyer, practice law.
Yeah.
I think it's a very admirable sort of career path. What are some of the things that you would say were the biggest challenges when making that transition from, I don't want to say partner, but a lawyer at a firm versus, running your own practice?
Yeah, 100%. So the biggest challenge initially was actually when I began to transition practice areas. My previous firm did a lot of litigation, so specifically class action litigation. So as a young lawyer, that was very motivating and exciting. So I'd be involved in national cases. And when I moved here, I was still practicing class action litigation. So I was involved with cases, going up against Bay Street firms. Yeah. And I got interviewed on Square Off, the show on CHCH News. Okay. I was on the radio. I got interviewed by the Globe and Mail. So that was all really cool and exciting. And
Spotlight kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And it was kind of as a junior lawyer, like it's kind of a shortcut to the top as well. So that was really exciting. But unfortunately, my firm's philosophy was, if they took on 10 cases and they struck out on 9, but they hit a home run on the first one, then that would justify the other 9. The problem for me as a lawyer is if you're working on the other 9 and not that 10th one, then it's not, as rewarding.
It's very defeating.
Yeah.
The way you just said that sounds very defeating, especially when, I've worked with you long enough to know, obviously you like to deliver and accomplish what we set out to accomplish.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, so continue.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I would say too, and I advise anyone of this generally that, don't be afraid to change as your life changes. So for me, since my wife and I moved here, we had one 3-month-old at the time. We now have 3 kids. So, as a dad, that completely changes your life and your availability. So, so it kind of a combination of factors of the work itself wasn't as rewarding as it was initially, but also I was looking for somewhat more stability. Litigation can be very exciting, but it can also be very time consuming at times. Sure. There's been some nights where, I spent the whole night in the office prepping for a case and, that kind of thing. So, so I would say my work now, it's still rewarding. It doesn't quite have those highs and lows though. So it's more consistent, and it's also more consistent from a revenue basis. Yeah. And that's something important, as a provider in your family, that you have to consider. So
yeah, kids are expensive.
Yeah, 100%.
No debating that.
So I would say changing practice areas was a big, significant change. So to go from litigation to learning new practice areas was challenging, but I was fortunate to have great support around me. I connected with an older lawyer at a conference actually, and him and I became close, and I ended up moving in and sharing office space with him, and eventually ended up taking over his practice. Yep. And along with that, his staff, who Deb and Alin, decided to stay on with me.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and they've been fantastic, and I can't thank them and my other staff as well. Helen and Sam and Terry and everyone in my office is just amazing to have.
Very friendly when you walk in too, which is nice because obviously, I've been in your office doing wills. Some of the stuff's dry, let's be honest, right? It's not exciting, but you walk in and everyone's very welcoming and concerned to do what it is I'm there to do, for instance. And I guess the best way to speak about, what it is you do is from my own experience, right? So you've obviously helped manage some very important aspects of my my life. And if something was to ever happen to me, I know that, my corporations and my kids and my families and my family members, are going to be not scrambling. You hate to hopefully I don't die, obviously, first and foremost, but, life happens, and you don't want to leave a sort of maze behind for your family to navigate.
Right.
So it's nice that we've been as close as we are, because obviously you'll be able to, if it ever did happen, be able to sort of guide my representatives and trustees to handle things accordingly. So that's just a comforting feeling for me, because obviously I'm invested in a lot of different things, and
for sure,
the thought of that being mismanaged if something was to occur is obviously devastating. So what led you to the law that you practice now, right? So I know you deal with a lot of corporate stuff. Obviously you've set up corporations for me and structured the shares and shareholder agreements and so on. So did you stumble into that? Obviously, I'm trying to understand your transition,
sure.
but what
Yeah,
led you to sort of be well known and to practice that specific stuff on a day-to-day?
Yeah, so before I opened my own practice, I had started that transition, somewhat having a more general practice. And part of that was, taking anything that would come in the door, just to be able to pay the bills,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
and, there'd be some interesting stuff like that. So I did immigration law, and I would represent people that were detained down at the detention center close by here.
Wow.
So I got to be in the jail a few times, which is an interesting place.
Yeah, sure.
And I was just reminded, actually driving in here, I did criminal law too.
Yeah.
And I had a client who was involved in an assault at Harry's New York Bar down the street.
Yeah. What a beautiful establishment.
Yeah, exactly. So I've seen some interesting things through that. But what led me specifically to practice in the areas I'm in now, which are real estate, corporate, and wills and estates, I was in court one day, and I had 3 real estate closings that day, and they all closed on time, but I was in court longer than I anticipated. And it kind of dawned on me that there might be another day where I get stuck in court all day, because when you're in court, you're basically at the court's mercy.
Yeah, sure.
So at that point, I was kind of at a fork in the road moment. So I decided to give up any court-based work and focus on a few areas. And part of that too was I tried to do learning outside of this. It's a requirement for all lawyers to do continuous professional development.
Sure.
But I try to do podcasts and reading books and whatnot on business development generally.
Yeah.
And one of the best tips I read was focus on a couple areas, basically. Yeah. Because it's better to be well known for a few things rather than to be a jack of trades.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've talked about it on this show. Obviously, talking from my own experience, I became sort of a professional in the property management space.
Right.
Established my company, established myself, built up a reputation, then got into real estate, did the same thing again there, and then all of a sudden got into construction, and now, as you know, my career is sort of progressing towards larger scale developments.
Yep.
But I didn't try to take it all on at once.
Right.
And that's a hard decision to make when I had the opportunity. Actually, one of the buildings I'm developing now, I had the opportunity 2 years ago to do this same project. So they invited me in. I just didn't have the capacity at the time, or I didn't think I had the capacity. And now, they didn't obviously do a whole lot. And here I am 2 years later, 2.5 years later, sort of leading the project. I've brought multiple developers together. I'll be handling shareholders. I've raised a bit of capital for the smaller equity partner in the deal. And, you look back and you go, oh, you could have did this then. But it is still important. I feel like I've learned so much in construction and dealing with cities and bylaws that I can come a little bit more prepared today.
Right.
So it's that sort of dichotomy of when is the right time. Is there a place where all the pieces align and it's perfect timing? Probably not. But you can really hold yourself back if you try to diversify too quickly, right? Yeah. And you start to affect the area you're strong in a negative way in some aspects, right? Because if I'm an excellent realtor and I have clients that rely on me and I'm sitting here trying to learn 5 new skills at once, something's going to suffer, right? Obviously, I have 2 kids. I've got, multiple sort of business avenues that I'm a part of. So, talk about the times, I guess, when maybe you wanted to take something new on, but you didn't. Obviously, you just gave us a great example of, leaving the courts and being at the mercy of the court system to better serve your day-to-day, your more stable revenue streams. And obviously we're talking law and real estate, but, I think those principles can be applied to many different segments of the economy. And it's important for people to know, there might be an opportunity your business can develop and transition into offering more services or more products. Maybe you come out with a clothing line and you offer pants and shirts, but you can do socks and gloves and hats and all this stuff. But, maybe you want to establish yourself first with the items that the best. Right. In your case, obviously the law that, obviously has high demand. People need corporations set up. People need to close real estate transactions. Talk about your experience and how beneficial that was or potentially harmful I think in this case it's beneficial to really narrow down on a few items that you practice on a day-to-day instead of trying to take on multiple different facets of the law community.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So I think, first of all, like it's opened up more time for me. And for me personally, like I try to, when I have that free time, focus it either on my health or my kids or my family generally, basically. So being able to practice and focus on these three areas, you just get, the more you do something, the more repetitive and the more times you do it, you tend to get better at it. So my office typically does 300 to 400 real estate transactions every year. So because of that, odds are we've come across a case. Or if not, as part of doing that number of transactions, you develop good contacts with other lawyers. So you just generally get quicker and better at it. And that's kind of produces more referrals in itself too. Like if you tend to do good work, like, you know, the best way to get more work is doing good work, is in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, so that being said, there has been potentially some money left on the table from, like, I've gotten referrals for family law cases because I used to do family law, for example.
I remember I tried to bring you something and you referred me. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of that too is like sometimes you have to know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I could probably give basic family law advice, but I haven't kept up to date with it, and that's when I find that's where people can get in trouble when they start to dabble in things.
And in most industries, I think the consumer, the client, really does appreciate a professional like you and me referring other professionals. Right. It makes you look more concerned about what it is they're after, what it is they need. Right. If you know there's somebody else that can, you know, either compliment you or maybe do it better than you, and you take the time to ensure that they're aware of that and refer that business out, I think leads to stronger relationships. It leads to a more professional, reputable reputation. Yep. So, you know, I'm a big believer on that. I refer things out. You know, we had Service Master here last week.
Yeah, and some of those things. To that episode, actually,
awesome. Those are some of the things they do. I do, right? There's renovations, there's remediation. I mean, they're the pros at remediation. Don't get me wrong, but you know, there's foundation work and that I could personally handle with some of my own trades. But they're the best, right? Yep. They do an excellent job. I know they're going to show up. They're going to do a great, you know, they're going to do a great sort of analysis in terms of scope, what needs to be done, and I want to offer my clients that. And it's nice to scale and grow with other like-minded professionals. I've always thought, you know, you don't need to be this lonely soldier at the top. You know, you can build a really wonderful organization that's surrounded by other really great professionals, and you all get to celebrate a little bit together, right? It doesn't have to be family or friends. You know, it can be colleagues and people you do have a friendship with or relationship with. But I mean, it's.
I would just piggyback off that saying, like I've built up referral contact with other lawyers too, like in areas I don't practice in. And I may be initially leaving some money on the table, but odds are they'll send me a referral back for an area they don't practice in.
Sure. Yeah, you start to, you know, and then you feed off each other, and the customer feels less like a, you know, this never-ending piggy bank for you. In a sense, you know, because you know, maybe there's tons of cases where, you know, people are spending a lot of money with your corporation and your services, and they're extremely validated. You know what I mean? They're legitimate.
Right.
But when you take the time, and people are not stupid, right? People understand. You know, if you refer them to someone and their legal bill is $5,000, that's $5,000 that you're not getting. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yep. That just shows how sort of committed you are to that relationship. So for new entrepreneurs or existing entrepreneurs, I think it's important to really take what we're talking about seriously, because it can benefit your business in some major ways, right? And further sort of help you achieve what it is you're after in terms of scale and growth and whatnot.
Right. And the other thing, the other piece of advice I'd give new entrepreneurs, and this would apply to lawyers as well, is don't be afraid to network. Like that's like by far been the number one revelation to me, because I grew up like two working class parents. Like my dad worked in a warehouse for Labatt's, my mom was a teacher, and you know, they provided a great household for us. I'm very thankful. But being in business is a different animal altogether. And again, it's something they don't teach in school either.
Yeah.
Right? So, so I've kind of learned that sometimes who you know can be as important as what you know.
Yep.
Because I know lawyers that are more senior than me, but are just from chatting with them, their practices are less busy than mine. And I think that's because I just try to go out and be active and be social.
Sure.
And I think that's actually become more of a tool. The more technology develops and the more people get attached to screens, basically. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday. There's this guy who writes for The Atlantic, Derek Thompson. He was talking about, what's coming next. And the future of technology was, he was worried with Apple Vision Pro that people are going to get more attached to screens.
Yeah. And
there's a negative correlation between connection to screen and anxiety. So, and human interaction generally. So he cited one stat that human interaction is, I'm not quite sure how they measured this, but they measured it over a 10-year period. It's decreased by 50%. Like what we're doing face-to-face conversation.
Obviously I know you have wonderful sort of digital assets that you rely on and digital platforms that add value to your clients, to your practice, as do I. And we've done a big transition in Q1 so far of 2024 in terms of reinvigorating our CRMs and, but again, it's I hate to throw the word around loosely, but there's balance, right? Like I think there's balance that's applicable when talking about sort of digitizing your business. And at the end of the day, AI is wonderful as an example and will benefit a lot of different consumers and corporations and segments of the economy. But I don't think it needs to be overutilized, right? People still want to shake a hand, 100%. Right? Even after COVID, people still shake hands. And people want to sit and have a face-to-face. People, I think, still and will always yearn for some human interaction, right? We're social beings. We're social creatures. So, again,
I'd say too, just to piggyback on that I've kind of discovered by accident the secret formula for business development, or at least one formula, is when I would first start, like I'd go to these Chamber of Commerce events, Business After 5, and within a minute I'd hand up my business card to someone, and I found that rubbed some people the wrong way. Yeah. So now I take the opposite approach. I just try to hang out and have a conversation with people, and sometimes I only give them my card if it's asked for, right?
Sure.
So to me, the formula is, if people want to hang out with you, maybe they'll like you, and if they like you, maybe they'll eventually trust you, and if they trust you, maybe they'll want to work with you at that point.
And that's a good point. Is don't be too in someone's face, especially at networking events and speaking events and those sort of platforms. They offer a ton of opportunity for individuals, entrepreneurs specifically. But don't be, people can read body language. People can read, your vocabulary. And if it's too in your face, it's nothing wrong to be a salesperson. Right. But if you're not really genuinely trying to establish a relationship or get to know somebody, that's pretty easy to pick up on.
100%.
And I think that's an invaluable asset in any field, is to be more focused on the relationship. And a lot of that other stuff that we get up every day to accomplish, income, keep our employees paid, scale our companies, that stuff comes after you dig into the relationship aspect, for sure.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm only 32 and I know that very well.
Yeah. And I think that'll be a tool that will be probably even more of a secret weapon, because I think there'll be a tendency for people to be more attached to their screens. So those people who can do that interaction and do it consistently, I think they'll be better poised for business success.
Absolutely. Okay, let's lighten it up a little bit here.
Sure.
We're getting into like some very structured stuff, which is all very valuable information. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
What are you allowed to share? What's the craziest sort of legal story that you're allowed to disclose that you've been involved in? Like, what would be like a crazy example of, wow, this is happening, or I'm seeing this, or this does happen? Obviously, you have purview into things that the general public doesn't see,
right?
Because you deal with, obviously there's a client attorney privilege and stuff like that. And I know I don't want you to disclose anything you obviously can't, but are you able to sort of on a surface level give us an example of like some crazy litigation case or like something you've seen or been involved in? I'd be curious to share with people just as a way to tell a funny story.
I have one that comes to mind, but it's not really funny per se. So maybe I'll hold that one.
Or whatever you think, whatever you want to share.
One of the very first cases I got involved with, at the time, it was the biggest class action in Canadian history, was with the Aboriginal school system.
Okay.
And that was very eye-opening, like that whole world that's within Canada. I wouldn't call it quite third world, but it was. I traveled to different reservations, and that was really eye-opening that exists here in our backyard, basically.
As a developed nation, I know, obviously I try not to get political on this show by any means, but you must have seen some things that were quite wild, or at least things that maybe the general public didn't know. And it's just so hard with media these days to differentiate, are you being fed the raw story, or are you being fed a narrative that you're supposed to believe and you're supposed to then share with your peers? And obviously,
I would say that was probably at the time kind of the prevailing thought, like that. Who cares? And these stories are exaggerated or whatever. But I can tell you firsthand that wasn't the case from my experience, like in talking directly to these people. So, that was really eye-opening. As far as I think things that are more lighthearted, this case with a family law case where I was in trial. That was, I just think of that because it involved another lawyer here from Thorold.
Yeah.
That was like something of a TV movie. Long story short, it was a bad breakup. It was kind of instructional too from like a legal point of view. The client who I was representing moved away from Niagara, but hadn't updated their address with the court, and that person's spouse was aware of that and found an old overtime check. I presented that to court as his regular check. So support doubled overnight.
Wow.
Unbeknownst to my client. And my client, went downhill quickly, but then 3 years later decided to fight it. And he came back and was looking for custody of his son. And in the meantime, she had gotten the Hells Angels involved, and they slashed his tires.
Wow.
And at one point, he's like, "I'm taking off." So he literally took off with his son,
which he wasn't supposed to do.
He wasn't supposed to do. And he came back eventually. Thankfully, he listened to me on that.
Yeah.
But this was something that was kind of instructional to me too. This was another reason I had switched practice there somewhat. He had been paying me consistently, but right before trial, I gave him kind of a leash, and because of his payment history. But right before trials where a bulk of the work occurs.
Sure.
So anyways, I got his arrears down by like a third from where they had been, and he got full custody of his son. So great.
So you did a good job.
Great job.
Yeah.
Send him the bill. 6 months later, he declares bankruptcy.
Wow.
So that was a lesson.
So what does that look like then for you? Client declares bankruptcy. Is there any sort of remedies for you to pursue?
Well, I was still with my previous firm at the time.
Oh, okay, so they took the blow.
They took the blow more so than I did, but I still suffered too because my pay was tied in part to my actually paid invoices I brought in, right? So that was a lesson, and a similar lesson. This was probably the second instance, which kind of led me somewhat into this area. It was a small claims case, and I was representing a guy who's a defense contractor. Again, kind of similar fact pattern. He was paying me as we were going along, and then I gave him a bit of a leash right before trial. Exact same thing played out kind of in a different way, but I send him the bill afterwards and find out he's moved to Iraq.
Iraq of all places.
Yeah. So, never to be heard from again kind of thing. So, those are a couple that come to mind immediately. So as far as, interesting cases, but also, good business lessons.
Eye-opening, I guess, for sure. And you learn and you adapt and you get better and you try not to make the same mistake, 2, 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
So appreciate everything you've shared, obviously, so far. Hopefully the guests will find some insight into what we've had to chat about. I think to wrap up, obviously we do talk a lot about real estate and mortgage finance and investing and different things like that. I think it's important for us to just tell the audience, especially for anyone that's looking to buy a house or, invest in a property, the importance of having a good lawyer And, not a good lawyer in a sense where you're getting the best deal, but a good lawyer in a sense where, you're doing proper title searches and you're advising them on language. And I've had, hundreds of chats on the way things were worded. There's things that I miss that you catch. There's things that you educate me on that could be worded better to protect the client. So, I think having a good relationship with the lawyers is very important. Obviously, accountants and lawyers are influential people in most segments of the economy, depending on, it doesn't really matter what you do. You need good representation in those categories. So, if you just want to, obviously we'll put your information here so people can reach out to you. If you're looking for a lawyer to do any sort of corporate stuff, set up corporation, shareholder agreements, wills, buying a transaction representation, selling a transaction. Obviously, you and your firm do a great job. You are my referral partner for all of my transactions. Obviously, sometimes clients have their own relationships, and that's fine. But, so we'll put his details down below. So anyone that needs any of those services, maybe I missed a few. If you want to disclose any other things that you guys specialize in. I know
those are the main areas: real estate, corporate law, wills and estates. So those would be our three main ones. Our website's osbornelaw.ca, and my personal cell phone number is on there too. So that's the other thing I should mention too. I try to differentiate myself somewhat from some of the bigger firms in town, at least by having a more personal connection.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So it's not my regular practice, but when it doesn't work for the clients to meet during the day, I make myself available at night.
I can vouch for that. I try not to abuse your time.
No, and there's always a balance too, right? Yeah. But I recognize too, like sometimes there's very important things going on, and it's a short time period to work with. So I was talking with a client last night, and just kind of looping back to our conversation about technology. Mm-hmm. I don't want to disparage that because we've been very adaptive of that. Yeah. Like so, actually, right before COVID, we did a big integration of things that are very mainstream now, but at the time like Teams and Zoom and things like that, especially in my practice, which is often led by not to be impolite, but dinosaurs, so to speak.
You're right.
Scared of change. And so anyways, I just last week picked up a deal from another lawyer because he doesn't use DocuSign.
I know.
Yeah.
It's crazy to think about, but it's so true.
Yeah. So we're putting the deal together for a closing scheduled for 2 days from now. And I've identified a couple of issues. So I was talking with the client last night, husband and wife. The husband's in the States right now. So I was talking to him last night because, we've got to get this done. So, you have to try and be available like that.
Absolutely. And, obviously still respect your time, respect your family's time. And those are all things as an entrepreneur that you will learn and develop over time.
Right.
And if you don't, usually you fail, right? You fail at home or you fail in your business life. So I think you've done a great job. I appreciate our relationship, all the things we get to do together. The trust that I put in you, that you deliver to on a day-to-day, week by week for my clients. And thanks a lot for coming on today. And first podcast, I think it went okay.
I think
so. And you know what, man, I appreciate it. And thanks for some of your insight. And wishing you all the best for the remainder of 2024.
I appreciate it. Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
So I, whenever I talk to other people, especially other business people, including my wife who has her own practice, and she's been amazingly supportive with me as well. So I'm very thankful to have her. But I try to pick their brains. So like, what would you say is the most valuable advice you've been given, or the most valuable lesson you've learned?
Definitely sort of the 80-20 rule with clients in terms of, I had to go through a tough lesson about 5 years ago where I was spending 80% of my time for 20% of my business. Yeah. And letting go of that is so difficult. And it took me like 30 plus days to realize I made the right decision. Like I was like, did I kill my business? I got rid of a client that was at the time probably made up almost 20% of my revenue. Wow. And, we replaced that revenue in like 6-7 months. Other clients were happier. I was happier. Staff were happier. So, really understanding that it isn't all just about the numbers and the revenue and the money. Yes, the sort of quantitative matters significantly, but it's not everything. you're passionate about law, you're passionate about real estate, you're passionate about management, passionate about helping people, you got to know when to cut ties sometimes. And that's a lesson that I'm still learning. I'm not perfect, but I've had some pretty dramatic experiences in my 7-8 year career so far where I've done that, and it's led to a lot of positivity.
Yeah.
So I think, spending your time with people that, not only appreciate and value you, but don't impact you in a negative way. And, maybe they bring a lot of money to the table, so it makes the decision to cut them off a lot more difficult. But in the end, I think you'll be satisfied if right? In your gut, you can get feedback from your staff or your own experience of something doesn't feel right, and this is this person's abusing my time or our resources. So I would think that's probably one of the most valuable things that I've come to learn so far in my career. Yeah,
and I'd agree with that too. And I've come across this saying a few times that your personality is the combination of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Absolutely.
And if you're spending 20% of your time with someone who's toxic, then that starts to seep into your life.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Thanks for the question at the end. Awesome. That was good. I'm glad we got to share that.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys, so much. Like I said, Stephen's information is going to be listed below. Any of those sort of legal services that you need or anybody needs, he is a great, great contact. I have worked with him for many years, and I appreciate, again, like I mentioned, you coming on here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Thank you.
Ciao.